ち。痛い。痛いって、もう痛い。痛い。Oh my god!
As he explores the basement, he sees this.
Located in Wallace, Idaho, the Jameson Saloon and Inn, or the Jameson Inn Restaurant and Saloon, as apparently they're called on Facebook these days, is one of the most haunted places in all of Idaho. According to IdahoHauntedHouses.com, that's a real site, the saloon dates back to 1892, and there are reports of multiple spirits inhabiting the property, including one named Maggie, and another one named Ollie. Now, Maggie likes to give hugs, she likes to touch people on the shoulder, pat them on the back, very affectionate. According to another local news source, Maggie perished in a fire after attending a football game with her friends, and her spirit returned to the inn because it was the first place she felt at home, which is kinda sad. Now, Ollie on the other hand, he's a bit of a prankster. He likes to mess with the lights, move things, even make weird noises. And while there are quite a few creepy stairways at the inn, none are creepier than the stairs leading to the basement. The question is, does an evil spirit loom down there? Sure looks like it. Like when I was looking at pictures of this place, it looks like the part in a horror movie where every character should just turn around and book it out of there. Other occurrences here have included lights that go on and off by themselves, shadows, objects being moved, smells of perfume, and the sounds of a party happening late at night. When doing a bit more research into the property, one news outlet found one particular comment unsettling, as it appeared to be from a former employee. There is a very evil spirit in the basement, and he does not like you doing substances in the basement with your friends. Well, apparently this evil spirit wants to keep the basement up to date with DARE guidelines. Now, this supposed former employee also went on to say that they actually had a medium inspect the property, and the medium confirmed that this spirit was killed in a gambling brawl and then carried down to the tunnels. What happened next? We don't know, and I don't think I want to know. At the age of more than 110 years old, Willard Library is the oldest public library building in the state of Indiana. And yes, it has quite the haunted basement. According to reports from visitors, some of the most frequent encounters with the legendary Lady in Grey have occurred in the reading room, which is in the basement. Now, the first reported incident happened like 60 plus years ago to a library employee who trekked through the snowy night for his nightly duty. Since then, countless other employees and patrons have reported seeing this apparition, each giving an eerily similar description. The Grey Lady ghost, oh, I love mysterious ladies, was the first reported to have been seen in the late 1930s, though. Specifically 1937, a janitor claimed to have seen a ghostly veiled lady dressed in glowing gray standing before him while he was on duty. Now, he was more shocked when he was able to bend down and saw that even her shoes were gray. Now, before the janitor could recover from the frightening event, the lady went poof, she disappeared. Now, since that time, those looking and not looking for the apparition have reported unexplained events and sights. Now, unless my research is wrong, the Grey Lady was last reportedly sighted on August 10th of 2010 in the basement hallway by the assistant librarian. Psychics visiting the library in 2007 said they were able to verify that a ghost had been there, and that paranormal investigative groups, well, they brought in their equipment to look for it. But there has been, I think around that time, several library employees who reported seeing the ghost. Now, during a visit to the library, lecturers from the University of Southern Indiana say they saw the ghost peering into water. Now, policemen once upon a time, responding to a security alarm, spotted not one but two ghosts at the library. Now, a patron reported an encounter with the Grey Lady in the elevator, and a local weathercaster also reported an encounter with the spirit. Now, every year, hundreds of people look for the Grey Lady during October, during some ghost tours that are sponsored by the library. 800 curious individuals attended the first such tour in the late 1990s, and it's been a popular annual event ever since. Sign me up. Whisperings of old age terrors, the prowling of ghosts, and stories of strange occurrences have been passed down for generations, giving Klamath Falls a spooky edge, especially when the leaves start to turn and the chilly nights grow darker. Some of the more widely known spooky spots in the area include Linkville Playhouse, where the ghost of one of the theater's former actors is rumored to haunt the halls. Now, there's also the bizarre phenomenon at Gravity Hill, and the strange activity at the old Baldwin Hotel, which is now a museum. But none of those have haunted basements, so remember them for a future video. Today, we're talking about the old house on Pear Street. which honestly sounds like a movie title. Michael Gravett is a paranormal investigator and the founder of Paranormal Sightings, which is a team of local ghost hunters that provides free investigations to anybody who thinks they might have a disembodied spirit, or multiple spirits, living amongst them. One of his investigations has been at his cousin's place on Paris Street over in the Falls. Now, according to county tax records, the house was built in 1937, and while it has a beautiful charm in the morning light, it looks a teensy-weensy bit unsettling from the outside when the sun goes down. So the owner of the house, Christina Hansaker, has lived in the home with her husband Anthony and their 4 offspring for about 5 years, as of the time of the storytelling. Now, they bought the house from their pastor and his wife, and that's when they first learned about the paranormal activity. Christina said the pastor told her that he and his wife would constantly hear boots stomping up and down the stairs as if someone was in the house. And this kind of spooked her. And although she didn't experience anything strange in the beginning, she was like, "Hey, cuz, can you come just do a little safety check?" So Gravett and his team came to the house with their equipment. We're talking night vision cameras, digital recorders, walkie-talkies, heat signature rays. This is the thing that emits an electromagnetic field, then beeps if there's any disturbance. So everybody got to work hunting ghosts, creeping around the house in the dark with the devices. The team was asking, "Hey, if you're here, if you're haunting here, could you just say hello? Make yourself known." And one of the recordings Gravett picked up that day was the sound of a weapon being fired in the basement. Another was of a man's voice, also coming from the basement. Now, one of the recordings that had been recovered, it was the guy down in the basement saying, "Get out of my house." Now, nobody knew what to make of this. Nobody knew, who could this be? We know this place is haunted, but we don't know who it could be. But then one day, a couple of months after the initial investigation, something weird happened. Christina recounted a stranger stopping by the house while she was having a yard sale. Now, the woman, who said she used to live in the house, came to tell her, this place is haunted. Christina said that she proceeded to tell her the history of the house, and it literally scared her out of her wits. The woman told her of strange nights when the family would be awoken by phantom knocks at the door. It was consistent knocking that would cause the entire family to get out of bed, walk down the stairs, and open the door, only to find darkness. But that wasn't even the worst of it. Don't worry, there is more. Now, what the strange woman told Christina was unsettling, but what scared her most was how the story coincided with the recordings from the basement. So, as Christina was told the story, apparently 2 sons of the man who built the house in 1937 were living together in the house, possibly in the 50s or 60s. One of the men was a truck driver and was constantly on the road, and the other apparently went down into the basement one night and took his own life. Now, Gravett said, based on what he found, from the sound he got on the recording, it sounds like the butt of a weapon hit the floor and the barrel went into somebody's mouth. Now, once it all started to sink in, Christina began to accept the house might be haunted by the man who took his own life in the basement all those years ago. Christina said she spoke to the man. She told him, "I'm okay with you being in the house, but please leave my family alone. I just want to live in harmony. You can exist, I can exist. We can coexist." Well, time went on, more things began to happen. The family's dog would regularly bark at one particular corner of the house for no reason, which, drives you crazy. And in the hallway, whenever Christina would hang a picture on the wall, it would come right down. As if, somebody just didn't want it there. I'm just hoping her family finds peace soon. In a video posted to TikTok, Madison Heinzen took viewers on a tour of the basement in the old Arnold estate in Harrisville, Rhode Island. Now, this home was built in 1736 and sits on more than 8 acres of wooded property. Now, this estate was a site of tragedy and sorrow for 8 generations of the Arnold family before a new family, the Perrons, bought the home in 1970. And it was their decade-long stay that launched the home into paranormal infamy and inspired The Conjuring. Now, Heinzen's parents, Corey and Jennifer, purchased the house in 2019, and Heinzen went on to explain in her video that the home was actually a daycare in the 1980s, and parts of the center are still in the basement and scattered throughout the house. The most unnerving thing is a toy box, where daycare attendants drew a lady who appears to have a broken neck. Did anybody see the ghost of Bathsheba swinging in the tree? Now, not much is known about the daycare or how long it operated, but Heinzen says all the parents withdrew all their clients from the center on the same day. Probably because of all the paranormal activity around the property. And finally for today, hiding away in the basement of the Riverton Museum is perhaps the creepiest doll in all of Wyoming. Its appearance is so unsettling that even museum employees are visibly reluctant to touch or hold it. Now, this doll's name is Amelia. She's one of those old-fashioned oilcloth dolls with what is still a pretty pink dress. Part of it's her hair. I didn't know she had human hair before, and that makes it really creepy. He's also just not a fan of touching the dishwater white oilcloth skin. He's I don't know how to describe it. The arms and legs are a puffy gray mess and it's just disturbing. And what's even more disturbing is the doll's face. While her face paint is still clear, dirt has smudged her forehead with strange circular lines that look kind of occult-like. Also, her nose has fallen off, and it's just a dirt smudge, and also the mouth is ringed with dirt. Now, we do have a story. There was a museum worker years ago who was assembling the dolls in a crib. She had just started prepping this doll, putting it in its place, kind of had it folded up to work on the shawl. And as she was pulling the shawl on for Amelia, she just wanted to straighten it up, she heard someone upstairs in the museum, a young voice, having a screaming fit of some kind. Now the commotion just kept going and going, on and on, until the worker finally decided to go upstairs, see for herself what on earth was going on up here. Well, the minute she headed upstairs, the wailing and kicking and screaming just stopped. Everything went silent. So she got up the top of the stairs, she looked around the museum, looking for the family with the noisy but now silent human, but nobody was there. So she walked to the front office to ask, hey, what's with all the ruckus? And her coworkers were kind of confused by her question. They were like, it's been quiet up here. She was like, no, the screaming person, just a minute ago. And they're like, I'm not sure what you mean. No one's been in today. Eep. This first spooky story came to us courtesy of former late-night transportation worker Betty. Now, she worked the position for a couple of years, but after this incident, did everything possible to never work a nighttime shift ever again. So, the transport home base was in the basement of a hospital, which is where all the laundry was done and all the supplies were sorted and housed. And on this particular night, Betty was the only one in the basement when she heard whistling at the end of the hallway, over by the elevator. So she poked her head around the corner, expecting to see her one coworker on duty, but there was nobody there. So she shrugged it off. She's like, okay, he's pulling a fast one on me. Now that night in particular was a little slower in pace, so she opted to take a snack break and veg in the break room for a bit, when she heard a loud bang out of nowhere. She walked into the hallway and a bed was rolling down the hall, bumping into the sides. Now at this point, she was absolutely certain that this coworker was playing a prank on her, and she directly radioed to chew him out, but he swore he was upstairs. Look, I'd be assuming the same. I've had a similar situation in a haunted house I used to work in. Whole thing. So Betty was smart about it, and she's like, okay, if you're not gonna fess up, I'm gonna catch you in the act. So she walks down the hallway, and as she passed the laundry room, all of the machines started up. Now, she poked her head in, she's like, okay, I gotcha. But the room was empty. Just a little red flag, nothing to worry about, right? Well, as she walked into the laundry room, the machines came to a complete stop. Now, Betty froze at first before regaining her senses and making her way towards the elevator, when she heard whistling once again from the other end of the hall. Now, at this point, she's pretty sure she's the only worker in the basement, and she's hitting every elevator button, like, okay, get me out of here, get me out of here. And as she was waiting for the elevator, things started falling off of the shelves, all down the hall. She could only stare in shock as boxes of gloves, tissues, packages of tubes all fell off of various racks one by one. Her entire body broke out into goosebumps, every hair was standing on its end, and the feeling of being watched had completely consumed her thoughts. When the elevator finally arrived, after what seemed like forever, she felt the sensation of someone brushing her arm and screamed in panic. Upon exiting the elevator upstairs, she made a beeline for the cafeteria, where her coworker actually was, and broke down explaining the entire ordeal. Well, fun fact about this spirit was actually a mimic. It turns out that Betty usually whistles to herself at work at night. She chats with the laundry folks if she's there during the day, and the items that fell off the shelf were items that she normally has to retrieve. Absolutely not. Never working night shift. How about we check out the lower levels of a castle next? And not just any castle, good old Castle Loma. If a place has secret tunnels, then chances are there's gonna be a couple of ghosties roaming around. Because tunnels, underground, ergo, basements. Now, I think this castle has a stern-looking old man gazing out from a window, who's probably Sir Henry Pellet, the castle's original owner. There's a British redcoat in the stables, and a lady in white walking the halls, and also some knocking in the tunnel. Sounds like a party. So the lady in white is believed to be a maid who worked there in the early 1900s, around the time when about 60,000 people in Toronto died of influenza. She's been seen in a lot of places by guests, or by cleaning or cafeteria staff, just hanging out. I love a good ghosty lady. Poltergeists have been reported numerous times in upper levels, but mainly in the basement. Turns out the castle offers ghost tours, led by Canada's Most Haunted. We've had stories going on in here since the 1930s when the Kiwanis Club took over the castle, according to Michelle DeRoche. the paranormal rep for the castle. So there's been plenty of Castle Loma ghost stories that pop up from time to time, such as the appearance of a man tending to the garden in the indoor conservatory, or the sound of young people's voices when no young folks are around. Few stories, however, are reported time and time again by different people. A woman believed to be Lady Mary has been spotted on the ground, although she's pretty elusive. At one point, the Canada's Most Haunted team attempted to film her room, leaving a camera running while they explored other parts of the castle, and when they got back to check the footage, the tape was gone. According to mediums who claim to have felt the presence of Sir Henry and Lady Mary, their spirits are not trapped there. They just want to be there, because, well, it's their home. The tunnel leading to the castle stables is where another of its most notorious ghosts is believed to roam, and that's why we're talking about basements today. A lot of folks have reported feeling as though they've been grabbed, they've had their hair pulled, which, no thank you. People have also reported hearing the spirit, sighing gruffly, and he's even been captured in recordings, speaking and interacting with visitors. In one recording, he mimicked a medium who was like, "Oh, he's a horrible person." Well, the medium just wanted to make contact. Little rude though. Evidence points to the voice belonging to the ghost of a friend of Sir Henry's, who was hired to look after the prize-winning horses. Guess it's time to check in with some friends who have worked events at Castle Loma. See if they've met anybody. Granted, I don't ever want to go near the basement of that place. Another classic option, a haunted church basement. Specifically the Most Holy Trinity Church in New York, built sometime between 1882 to 1885 on land that previously served as a graveyard. According to local rumors, not all the bodies residing there were exhumed, and the spirits of those left behind still inhabit the grounds to this day. The church covers an entire city block, and it is said that there are false closets leading to bricked up doorways, tunnels, and random sub-basements throughout the church and convent. There's also mysterious passageways on the upper levels of the church where legend says only priests are able to enter. Now the church's rectory was built in 1872 by its second pastor, Monsignor Michael May, who later passed in his room on the second floor. Priests who live in the rectory have used that space for mainly a guest room ever since, because nobody really wants to live in it on an ongoing basis. Guests have experienced lights being switched off and on, hearing strange noises, and the sound of a person walking back and forth while trying to sleep. Phantom footsteps have also been heard on the staircases in the building, and the dogs who were once kept as pets in the rectory would stare in a trance-like state down the basement stairs, as well as into the dining room where the building got cold. In 1897, a parish bell ringer named George Steltz, had his life taken in the vestibule of the church. Granted, there was a suspect, but nobody was ever convicted of the crime. The red fluids of George, as well as the red-handed print of the killer, is believed to still be on the wall in a stairway leading to the bell tower. George's ghostie still roams the church and is believed to be the reason why the bells will ring suddenly, vowing not to leave until his death has been solved. Honestly, just burn the entire place. This next experience is courtesy of Redditor Camel Cove Sniper. His buddy's old house was haunted. People would always hear footsteps, creaking floors, but they would also see this mysterious dark figure on the house. So, one night, our buddy's over there, he's got a whole group of friends over, and the guy who actually lives there is like, "Okay, I dare anybody to go into the basement." Well, seeing as Camo was the only one who didn't experience anything until that point, he's like, "Okay, I'll do it." He got down there, waited for 2 minutes, and just as he was about to leave, he saw a shadow in the corner of his left eye. Now, he snapped to his left and saw a large looming figure. It seemed devoid of anything or any presence other than the cold that came over Camo's body, and as soon as he saw it, his hairs jumped to a stand on his neck. He froze, just staring at the unknown. The feeling was so surreal that Camo still can't put it into words. Then his heart pumped super fast, his body got really warm, everything in his head was just going danger, 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 danger. So he turned to his right, ran towards the stairs, and looked back for half a second, and then realized this thing, whatever it was getting even closer. So then he ran. He just ran like the wind, jumped up the stairs, ran to the first floor, and hid behind an armchair, just staring. Everybody else was like, "Yo, dude, what's wrong?" He pointed, and then everybody looked and saw, that thing had made it to almost the top of the stairs from the basement. So everybody booked it towards the balcony, jumped into the backyard. They looked up, expecting to see it standing there, but nothing was there. Just the thing didn't leave the basement. Creepy. Now, our Camo didn't go near the basement ever again. And this final scary experience comes courtesy of 7-time Mama Bear. So when she was still married to her military husband, he was overseas and she moved the family into a 100-year or so old house. She was renting, it was wonderful, it was in a rural area with a huge yard, but the only one little teensy-weensy problem was that it had mysterious happenings. One of the things that Mama soon learned that happened on a regular basis was the knocker. So, for context, the basement of the house was very dark, very damp. Pretty normal for a house, and like most families, she kept the washer, the dryer, and the deep freezer in the basement. So She had to venture down there pretty often. But she never allowed her descendants down due to the dark, the dampness. She wanted to keep them safe. And the only entrance to the basement was a door located in the kitchen, which was right next to the back door, which also in the kitchen. Pretty typical layout. Not long after the family moved in, Mama heard knocking on the back door. She's like, oh, must be a neighbor. Went to go answer it, but as she got closer to the door, she realized, oh, it's not the back door. It was the basement door. Now, she knew her offspring were in the living room, and she couldn't figure out who would be in the basement, so she opened the door. Nobody's there. And this went on to occur on a regular basis. At least once a week, she heard the knocker. And she asked the neighbors, she asked the person who owned the property, they knew nothing. So, as one does, she's decorating the house. She hangs up a picture of her and her husband on the wall by the front door. Very cute, very sweet, very fitting for a military family. And many, many, many mornings, she would come down to find it either hanging upside down, lying on the floor beneath one of the chairs or sofa. She would replace it, leave it at that, but it was weird that only that photo was being targeted. So, fast forward, we got a random weekend, her parents come to visit. They're sitting in the living room and suddenly, here comes the knocking on the basement door. She tried to ignore it, but her mother was like, hey, don't be rude, let's go answer it. Now, Mama was following through being like, look, Mom, like you're not gonna wanna do it. But her mom was like, you're rude. So she opens the door and there's nobody there. So what happened? Well, she stalked back into the living room, picked up her purse, and as she was going out the door, she told her husband, yeah, I'll be in the car. He drove her the 3 hours home and she refused to ever come back. Another time, after Mama's husband returned from overseas, they had guests, once again, sitting in the living room, hanging out. Suddenly, the husband stopped talking and he was staring at the wall next to the front door. He said, get the offspring, it's time to go home. Now, Mama followed his stare to the front door and realized that the photo was slowly turning upside down. There were other strange occurrences, and it soon became pretty apparent that whatever it was didn't like her husband at all. He called the entity Hardy, and yeah. I know they did leave that house. I know they did divorce. Oh, I don't want to go into that home ever.
Coming in at number 5, Duffel Bag. One of the many stories hailing from Reddit, this user tells of the time they were sharing a house with some friends, and on one particular night they decided to explore the basement. As you do, considering they hadn't been down there since they had moved in. The user describes a small dirt crawl space in the basement, so one of the men decided to grab a flashlight and check it out. However, soon after the man yelled out after discovering something quite concerning. He emerged carrying a duffel bag, which contained items that would send chills down most sane people's spines. But not mine, never mind, I don't understand the concept of fear. It's called being a sociopath. Anyway, the bag contained a hunting knife, 2 black ski masks, and 1 single black leather glove. Very O.J. Simpson. The group called the police immediately, but for some strange reason they couldn't do anything with the evidence, so the group decided to burn everything except for the hunting knife, which the user states that he still possesses. If it were me, I would have burned that as well. You never know who may return one day looking for that knife. Coming in at number 4, Pet Gator. A Michigan reptile expert has some advice for you animal lovers out there. Do not get a pet alligator. Period. Because it will get bigger, and when it does, it will bite you and try to eat you. According to reports, a man in Michigan owned an illegal pet alligator which he kept in the basement of his home. Yes, you heard me correctly, the basement of his home. The gator was apparently kept in a cage away from the outside world and even far away from light. Where still, the man stated that he would often let the gator out into the backyard to play, I guess? I don't know. Thankfully though, the gator was taken off his hands when a mechanic who was fixing something in the basement took pictures of the illegal pet and called animal control. The gator was thus released back into the wild, with the man being charged for owning an illegal pet. However, this wasn't the only case of a person owning a gator, which is baffling to me. According to reports, pet gators are on the rise in Michigan specifically, with at least 6 of the scaly creatures being spotted on the loose, popping up in lakes, parks, and backyards. On one occasion, a man was seen lassoing the neighbor's pet gator when they found it tromping across their yard after it made an escape. The owner of the gator, named Puff, took it back home before stating, "It's hard for people to understand. People judging me don't know about alligators. They make good pets." Sure, Jan. Coming in at number 3, Secret Bunker. So this point should be prefaced by saying, whenever a homeowner passes away, real estate agents sell the house as is, with all the contents still inside. for the most part, which to me is absolutely horrific. And on one particular occasion, this happened. However, the new homeowner was thrilled to receive some new goods and furniture and headed to the basement to survey the rest of his loot. However, when he got to the bottom of the stairs, he found an odd sheet of plywood attached to the wall. He went to remove it, but discovered something truly harrowing: an entrance to a secret room. The room was just 4 by 4 feet, but it was filled with the unthinkable. It contained several gun cases and manuals, a giant safe, an assortment of ammo, and a hollowed out grenade. The man also discovered a chest containing money, but sadly it was just pennies, but beggars can't be choosers. Now, whether it was a doomsday bunker or something much darker, we will never know. But what do you guys think? Coming in at number 2, a stranger. Now, this one is just downright terrifying. One ordinary day, a group of college students who had been living in the house for some time discovered something oddly suspicious. The group discovered a secret room that was quite clearly being lived in. Now, the entire house was being shared by 15 people, so it was difficult to keep up with everyone in the house, with most of the boys just assuming that the locked basement room was a maintenance closet that the landlord wanted to keep closed. However, when maintenance workers knocked on the door down there, they discovered a bedroom complete with framed photographs and textbooks. Creepier still, during the summer, one of the students walked into the basement and encountered a man who said he had wondered when he was going to meet the new residents of the house. What? And when asked if he lived on the first floor, the man skirted around the question. The group of students had the locks changed that night and posted a note asking their uninvited house guest to call them, which surprisingly he did. A man named Jeremy ended up contacting the students before moving his belongings out of the room. It actually turned out that Jeremy's cousin had lived in the house the year prior, which is how he got in, according to the housemates. The locks had never been changed. Rookie mistake. Talk about a dangerous situation. Thankfully, it wasn't a lot worse.
I'd been telling everybody the story about the ghost in our house, coming and opening all our cupboards and the oven and the microwave and all this stuff.
And finally, coming in at number 1, we have doll family. In my opinion, there is nothing creepier than a doll. Actually, sorry, I'm wrong. There is nothing creepier than a cluster of dolls. That's right, cluster. Let's say a family of dolls living beneath your house without you ever knowing. Yeah, sounds terrifying, right? Well, one Reddit user stumbled across one thing no one would ever want to see: a family of dolls in a basement, seemingly behind bars. A restaurant in Phoenix was home to this horrific basement scene, with the person who discovered it descending down a long spiral staircase that led directly to the basement. And of course, he would regret his decision immediately. The image itself shows a line of dolls sitting along a wall at a makeshift table, as if they were about to eat dinner. However, upon further observation, you can clearly see that it is less of a dinner and more of a Last Supper, with the doll in the middle looking strangely human and clearly depicting Jesus. It doesn't stop there though. There are also coins spread out across the table, with the scene surely haunting the man to this day. However, like all terrifying things, this was not the only encounter with creepy dolls. This old lady doll was discovered in the basement of an estate sale. It's incredibly frightening to look at, and worse still, the doll has the body of an old woman, something you typically don't see on any doll ever. Not to mention the expression on the doll's face is one of anguish, preventing you from looking at the picture for longer than a couple of seconds. Unless you're me, I stared at it for hours. I'm still looking at it now. The Reddit user who discovered the doll stated that there was a name carved into the back of the doll's neck, suggesting it was the previous owner. Worse still, the doll was discovered in a black box, tightly secured, suggesting someone didn't want it to be opened.
Number 5, Panzer. Something that's pretty recurring for strange artifacts people find on moving into an old house is memorabilia or relics from one of the many wars that has existed on this warlike people. Crates and trunks full of Civil War dollars, maybe an old uniform or old medals. It's either very boring or interesting stuff if you're a history buff. I actually have a relic or two from the Soviet army in my personal collection. Maybe I shouldn't say that on the internet. What do you think is the oddest relic you could find in a basement? Old battle plans, an old helmet maybe? Maybe an entire German tank from the Second World War? In 2015, authorities were called to the attention of an 84-year-old retiree living in Heikendorf because his neighbors were suspicious about the things they thought that that they'd seen in his home, referring to paraphernalia from a certain group of troublesome nationalist socialists that YouTube doesn't like me talking about. Owning memorabilia from this infamous political party, we all know the one, can carry a criminal charge in some countries and is generally pretty frowned upon in most parts of the world, even if you're telling people you're just a big Wolfenstein fan. Well, if owning a hat with the logo on it is already close to illegal, imagine owning one of their weapons of war. There's actually significantly more laws restricting the ownership of World War II weaponry than you'd expect, surprisingly. There's no specific legalese for what to do if you happen to find a fully functional, nearly 80-year-old steel titan of rolling thunder and war in your neighbor's basement, though. Among the collection, is for lack of a better term, included torpedoes and multiple munitions and weapons. It took 9 hours of excavation. They literally had to call in the German army to excavate this guy's basement. They discovered a series of uniforms and other various World War II memorabilia from a certain political party that you probably wouldn't want to have in your basement. Hey, everybody's got hobbies. Some people collect Funko Pops of the Golden Girl, some people collect weapons of war. The man was taken in and arrested, and several museums and private collections in the United States offered to buy the items off of him to preserve for museums. A noble idea for sure, but good lord, could you imagine the shipping costs on a Mark IV Panzer? 2-day free shipping from Amazon Prime, gonna cover that. And if you're looking for way more weird stories, things people have found, cryptids, aliens, conspiracies, true crimes, basically, if it freaks you out, we've done a video or 2 on it. So please, I invite you to click subscribe, make sure to hit that little bell so you don't miss anything, but would you kindly do that at the end of this video? Because I got 4 more weird things found in the basement coming up for you right now. Number 4, sharks. They say you need to be a shark to make it in the cutthroat world of real estate. I think that's speaking metaphorically, but I've been wrong before. Perhaps sometimes people take that a bit too far. In 2019, a 38-year-old in New York was arrested after suspicions that he was doing something strange with sharks when locals in the neighborhood noticed that he had several undergrown sandbar sharks in the back of his truck. Now, 1 or 2 sandbar sharks. When asked, he pleaded guilt to reselling the sharks to private buyers. I would have folded immediately too. I have zero idea how you can explain yourself when the cops ask why you have a bunch of sandbar sharks in your back seat. Well, as if that wasn't nearly enough hot water, things only bubbled up more when the NYPD shipped up to his house and discovered those sharks in the back seat were just the starter sharks. Inside his home was an above-ground pool in the basement containing 7 live sharks and several not as alive sharks. Whether or not they were snacks for the other sharks or just sharks that didn't make the cut, not particularly clear. Now, this might surprise you, but it's actually illegal to sell sharks out of your basement. What actually surprised me, however, is that the trade of them is the illegal part. If you get yourself a fancy permit, you are legally allowed to keep sharks in your basement, but a license costs upward of 10 grand. But imagine being able to flash your shark license at parties. Unbelievable conversation starter and probably the best opening line on Tinder imaginable if you could mention your shark license. Now, if you're worried about these basement dwelling sharks, fret not. They all found homes at the Coney Island Aquarium where they live peacefully and happily, having escaped containment to end up in a slightly larger containment with nicer accommodations. It's kind of like moving up to a minimum security prison where they let you play badminton on break. Number 3, the secret roommate. Do you have roommates? The odds are decent if you're a young adult watching this video, you probably do. Millennials all live with 14 other people in a house where no one's doing the dishes and we're all stealing the Wi-Fi from Ben's parents. Roommates can be fun. Nice to have someone to split a pizza with and watch Eraserhead after partaking in some stuff. But sometimes a roommate can be a total nightmare. Doesn't clean up after the shower, late on rent, secretly squats in your basement like the Phantom of the Opera. In 2013, a group of Ohio State students discovered, I'm gonna say this, probably the worst thing you could find in your basement, an extra roommate that none of you knew was living there illegally. Initially, they thought it was a joke. A group of freshmen at Ohio State moved into a co-op house and started feeling uneasy. Things would go missing, lights would be left on, objects would be moved. At first, the friends thought that they had a poltergeist on their hands and joked that the house was haunted. Well, it was, of sorts. The friends were searching for the source of these off-putting noises, and they eventually found their way towards a locked door in the basement. They called in their building manager. He came in and knocked the door down, and they discovered a makeshift hovel with a little living arrangement, framed photographs, and everything. There was someone living in secret in their basement. Their guest was swiftly evicted, and almost heartwarmingly, the students felt bad, quoted as saying, "I'm sure he's a nice guy. I feel bad he was evicted, he just wasn't supposed to be there." The scariest part of all of this is that the leasing company hadn't changed the locks in years, or asked for any keys back from any previous tenants, which was how their guest was able to get back in and sleep over for so long. Who knows how many other people could have had keys? It's a good thing it ended as benign as it did. Number 2, 1,200 skeletons. Some people have skeletons in their closet. Secrets better left unsaid and undiscovered. I'll never tell you what's in my closet. Some of us have significantly more skeletons in their closet than others, like famous founding father Benjamin Franklin, who had roughly 1,200 bones in his closet. Bizarrely. Philadelphia's second most beloved man after Frank Reynolds, Benjamin Franklin, lived in a modest home in London at 36 Craven Street. In 1776, Franklin would pack up and move out of Craven Street. There was like some new country that was getting made or something. I can't really remember the name. I don't feel like there's any records of it. I don't know if anyone knows about this. Comment if you know what that means. Well, some 200 years later in 1998, conservationists were repairing 36 Craven, looking to turn Franklin's old bachelor pad into a museum, but perhaps they should consider a haunted house attraction instead, because they discovered a meter-deep pit in a windowless room beneath the garden containing 1,200 bones. Forensic evidence suggested the bones were centuries old, lining up with when Franklin was alive. Was the founding father secretly doing Dexter Morgan stuff in his basement? He was a Freemason. Was he involved in terrifying rituals? And if Assassin's Creed 3 is to be believed as historically accurate, which I'm sure it is, he was involved with an ancient conspiracy of assassins. Now, before you raise your pitchforks at this fast-talking Canadian for besmirching one of the founding fathers, it's actually more understandable than you think. It's pretty freaky, but it's understandable. You see, back in the day, the study of anatomy was kind of frowned upon and looked down on as being grisly and unpleasant and not fit to rub elbows with proper society. So, surgeons and doctors had to turn to grave robbing to get cadavers. Franklin's spot was a safe spot for his friend and protege, the young William Hewson, an up-and-coming surgeon. The place was secure, clandestine, and owned by a trusted friend, so Hewson would dig up bodies and then bury his experiments in his good friend Ben Franklin's backyard. So, Benjamin Franklin just had some very strange friends, and he's not a deranged serial killer that we know of. Number 1, a whole city. And finally, I like to think I've saved the best for last here. We found some strange stuff in the basement so far. We got a tank, sharks, skeletons. But to top it off, we're gonna go with the strangest thing anyone ever found in their basement, an entire lost city. Basically the plot of Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, but for real. Located in Cappadocia, Turkey, this extraordinary underground complex was discovered completely by accident in 1963 when a local man decided to renovate his basement. So if you've been sitting on your laurels waiting to get started on that home reno project, you might want to. You might have a secret kingdom beneath your basement. As the man began to dismantle a wall in his home, he stumbled upon a hidden passage that led to a vast underground chamber. Does this not sound completely made up? Like it's the plot to a video game or something. But it happened. Further exploration revealed an expansive network of rooms, tunnels, and staircases extending as deep as 18 stories beneath the surface. This would turn out to be Derinkuyu, an underground city that had remained hidden for centuries. This guy basically found Atlantis in his backyard. Derinkuyu is estimated to have been built around the 8th century. That's a long time ago, and was used by these ancient inhabitants as a sanctuary and refuge during times of persecution. The city was designed to accommodate thousands of people, featuring living quarters, kitchens, stables, chapels, ventilation shafts, even a sophisticated water system. It's believed that Derinkuyu could have provided shelter for up to 20,000 people along with livestock, ensuring their survival during extended periods of isolation. They would have loved quarantine down there. This discovery shed light on the resourcefulness and advanced engineering skills of its creators. This precision, complexity, and architectural planning involved in such a vast underground settlement were amazing achievements for their time. And some guy just discovered it by accident. accident because it was in his backyard. That's maybe my favorite fact I have ever learned on this channel. Now, the whole real reason behind it is still a topic of speculation. Some people suggest it was primarily for defensive purposes, with its hidden location providing protection against possible invaders, while as others have proposed that it might have served as a center for religious or ceremonial activities because of how many chapels and religious iconography are on its walls. Or maybe it was just like a secret city and they were doing like a Bioshock thing and all the best and brightest were hiding out there from away from society. Anything's equally likely. When you go home tonight, or if you're at home already, I would start knocking on some of the walls or knocking on the floor just in case you have a secret kingdom hiding away.
Kicking off at number 5, a cemetery. Yep, you heard that correctly. Now, the trope of a home being built atop a burial ground or a pagan sacrificial site is commonly prevalent in horror literature and cinema, mainly lending itself to the rapid expansion of the modern era and the ignorance of ancient history. In cinema, we've got Pet Sematary, Amityville Horror, and Poltergeist, as well as many more, but as I say time and time again, sometimes truth is stranger than fiction. That's exactly what happened in 2003 when Wisconsin woman Helen Wiesenthal found a child's skull after attempting to repair the foundations of her basement. Initially, she thought it was evidence of an unsolved murder, but when surveyors later found a literal cemetery spanning beneath her basement, things got a little weird. It turned out that the skull belonged to a male that was buried in 1840, and there were countless disturbed graves just sitting and waiting patiently beneath Helen's basement. The good news though is that she'd lived there for 20 years and hadn't yet been possessed by a poltergeist, so she must have been doing something right. Next up at number 4, a nest of snakes. We're going back to the USA again, a small town in Idaho where couple Ben and Amber Sessions had recently purchased what they believed to be their dream home. Yeah, be careful what you wish for. Soon after moving into the house, husband Ben started finding snakes in the yard. At first it was a few, not too big of a deal, right? This is rural Idaho. But then Ben found over 40 snakes slithering in his yard in a single day. He literally had to shovel them out by the bucket load. Then things took a turn for the worst and the couple started hearing rustling in the walls. Mice? No, it was like a slithering sound, a buzzing barrage of slithering movement, kind of like the walls were moving. Well, that's when Ben went down to the basement crawl space the next morning, and after he slid away a panel in the foundation, he stepped back in horror. The walls were filled with snakes. Turns out their dream home was actually built on a terrifyingly gigantic hibernaculum, a literal hive of hundreds of snakes living and breeding and feeding on the house's warmth. In an even sadder turn, they had to abandon the house and file for bankruptcy, not before the estate agents that sold them that house tried to put it back on the market for the next unwitting victim though. Those damn estate agents. Coming in at number 3, Ben Franklin skeletons. Old Benjamin Franklin, the first American and a founding father of the United States, inventor of the bifocals and the Franklin stove. He's got nothing to hide, right? Well, it turns out that he had quite a few skeletons in his closet. Well, basement actually. In 1998, conservationists back in England began making repairs on Franklin's London home, 36 Craven Street, when they stumbled upon a pretty bloody discovery. It turned out in the basement of the house, more than 15 bodies, 6 of which were children, were buried in a secret windowless room. However, although I'm not entirely convinced, it's widely considered that Ben Franklin wasn't harboring evidence of some horrific homicide, but may have actually been covering for his friend William Hewson, Franklin's friend and academic protege that was running an anatomy school at the time. In the 18th century, human dissection for scientific purposes was still ethically frowned upon, and students had to acquire cadavers illegally. This included paying grave robbers to dig up remains of the newly deceased. So Ben Franklin was just being a good friend, right? Either that or he was a sadistic mass murderer. Next up at number 2, mummified children. Yeah, you're going to be seeing a pattern with our next 2 points. Pretty morbid stuff. Back in 2010, 2 women, Gloria Gomez and Yiming Jing, found 3 large trunks in the basement of the once Grand Glen Donald apartment in Los Angeles. After opening them, they found what appeared to be a hoard of antique treasure, a gleaming crystal bowl, stacks of beautiful books, including an original copy of Peter Pan, and 2 leather doctor's satchels. Thinking they were worth a hell of a lot of money, they started digging deeper, but when they found a small bundle of newspapers in the satchels, they shrank back in horror at what was wrapped inside them: the mummified remains of 2 babies. It turned out that the trunk was owned by a Scottish-born nurse by the name of Janet Mann Barry, a strange coincidence as the same initials of the author of Peter Pan. The possibility of her being related to the author was explored, but detectives found no such connection. Through DNA evidence, detectives found that the corpses were the children of the nurse, and although the case is closed, the explanation for the baby's death will likely never be discovered. And finally, coming in at number 5, we have a story that found college students Brett Muglin and Mark Hartman questioning whether they would even finish their senior year. In 2013, the pair moved into an absolutely huge student house at Ohio State University. Things were going great until one morning when they woke to find every door in every room wide open. Bedroom doors, the dishwasher, the dryer, the washing machine, even the microwave. Talking to their college newspaper, they said, "We've been telling everybody the story of the ghosts in our house coming and opening all our cupboards, the microwave and oven, and all this stuff. We weren't really sure how to explain it." Things got even weirder when they would start to hear strange noises like dings and alarms late at night. They thought it was coming from downstairs, so they decided to investigate. Brett and Mark scoured the house but didn't find anything until they reached the basement, where they discovered a locked door that no one had a key to. Sounds? They were coming from inside. The noises and strange occurrences continued for weeks, until Brett had a weird encounter. He was fixing the power downstairs when he came across a man they had never seen before. Without skipping a beat, the man told Brett, "I was wondering when I would get to meet the people who live here." He introduced himself as Jeremy. Later that day, when Brett and Mark were hanging out with the house's downstairs lodgers, Brett made a comment that he'd met their roommate Jeremy recently, to which they all replied, "We don't have a roommate named Jeremy." In fact, no one had even heard of a man named Jeremy. So, of course, they called the landlord, who then called the police, who then pried off the mystery basement door and inside found a livable bedroom with photos, a TV, and a wardrobe full of clothes. There were even family pictures on the walls, to which Brett later identified the man that he'd met. I told you guys, lock your doors. Next up at number 4 is something pretty different. In August of 2010, amateur antique collector Gloria Gomez was keen to explore the basement of an abandoned Los Angeles apartment building. She had caught word of 3 large trunks that had been left behind from the 1930s and was eagerly hoping to find some treasure. Unluckily for Gloria, the first 2 trunks were empty, but as she broke the lock on the third, she was astounded by what she had found. A gleaming crystal bowl, stacks of beautiful books, and an incredibly rare copy of Peter Pan. There were also 2 leather doctor's satchels, which Gloria had hoped would be worth a pretty hefty sum. While inside those bags were small bundles of LA Times newspapers from the 1930s. But what she found wrapped up in the print made her shrink back in horror. The bundles contained the mummified remains of 2 babies. Initially, not knowing if they were human, she feared that she had disturbed their spirits. Her friend had asked if they should bury them, but Gloria was adamant that they call the police. Police investigators estimated that the babies had passed away up to 8 decades ago. But as to how they had died or why they were even there remains a mystery to this day. Bringing it into number 3, we've got another golden oldie with the bizarre story of Theodore Edward Conis. In September 1941, America was still in the grip of the Great Depression, and Theodore Edward Conis had fallen on hard times. He decided to visit his old friend Philip Peters in the hope that his fortune would take a turn for the better. When he arrived at Philip's place in Denver, Colorado, no one was home. Philip was out to see his wife in the hospital, who was out with a broken hip. So, ever the opportunist, Theodore let himself in. Now, Teddy was a pretty small man, and he had managed to slip through a tiny door that led to a cozy little room inside the house. Facing a harsh winter, he figured it was probably best just to stay put. Now, this is where things get a little bit out of hand. Instead of just coming clean and letting Philip know that he'd snuck in while he was out, Theodore remained hidden and lived in the tiny room for weeks. Whenever Philip would leave his house, he'd sneak out, help himself to food, and use the bathroom. This lasted until October 17th, an entire month's worth of hide and seek. On that day, Teddy did his usual routine and slipped out of his hiding hole to cook some lunch. Except Philip hadn't gone out this time. He was actually napping and was terrified by the man walking around his house. Theodore attacked Peters, brutally pistol whipping the 73-year-old man to death. Instead of fleeing the scene, Teddy had gotten used to his hiding spot and returned there after the crime. Police were called after Philip's friends hadn't heard from him in a while and discovered his body while checking the house. The investigators were completely perplexed by the crime and left the case cold. Philip's wife hired housekeepers shortly after his death, but they all quickly left, convinced that the house was haunted. Teddy remained in the house for an insane 11 months until he was caught. It was only until a stubborn police surveillance officer saw him twitch a curtain. He was chased through the house back to the tiny hole that he'd been hiding in. Crazy. Now, at number 2, we're going back to the basement in Beijing. In 2017, a Chinese state report highlighted the existence of an entire underground city of workers right underneath a luxury Beijing apartment complex. Homeowners of the Zhulong Gardens residence first became suspicious when they'd started to notice more and more unfamiliar faces in the apartment's lobby. After notifying officials, an investigation led to the discovery of a warren of hidden rooms starting at the building's basement. The underground space office had been subdivided into separate workers' dorms, kitchens, and even a smoking room. The space was incredibly cramped and a stark contrast to the luxurious Julon gardens above. The inhabitants of the Warren were migrant workers who had risked an unsafe living environment just to earn a wage. Sadly enough, similar stories have been increasingly common, with Beijing reported to have the least affordable rental housing in the world. Finally, coming in at number 1, we have the story of Davis Wallman, an employee of Seattle's Como News. Well, he heard rustling in the upper levels of his Washington home. When he tried the door, he found it locked, which was odd considering that it was, his house. In the unusual position of knocking on a door in his own home, it took a while before he heard a voice reply, "Jimmy, is that you, Jimmy?" He heard more rustling as well as odd noises making their way closer and closer to him. Before he knew it, the door had swung open and Davis was confronted by the face of a strange, dark-haired woman, a complete stranger in his own home. Davis asked the woman who the heck she was and why she was in his house, but the woman insisted, "This is my house. I live here. Jimmy said I could live here." While sneakily calling 911, Davis tried to keep the woman distracted until police could arrive. Unfortunately, they took almost 20 minutes to get there, and the strange, dark-haired woman had disappeared. Davis says he has no idea how the woman had entered his house. Nothing was stolen, and there was very little out of place. Police are still investigating the case, and Davis has since changed all of the locks on his doors.